What is up, everybody? We are back here at King Film Sports for the college football Week 15 playoff ranking predictions, as well as breaking down the whole playoff field and all of the potential scenarios heading into conference championship weekend. Reminder that we will also be giving out our conference championship predictions and betting locks tomorrow, and be reacting to what the College Football Playoff Committee does Tuesday night in terms of their rankings here. And then we will be breaking down next Saturday night what the final predictions are for the playoff committee and be analyzing some of those playoff matchups. But here we get into what changed from this last week here, week 14, rivalry week. And the big update was in the Texas A&M game actually on Friday night, where Texas wins that one by double digits. So Texas A&M not only falls down from the 3 spot, likely to around 7 or 8, but also is no longer in the SEC title game. So they probably will not have a first round bye there. Then we had a couple other scintillating games, but the favorite ended up holding in a lot of those there, so not as much chaos as perhaps some fans were hoping for. So now let's get into what I think that the CFP rankings will be, starting out here 1 through 8, and then explaining the best case scenario possible for all of these teams and how they can improve their seed. So starting out, we've got Ohio State at number 1, 12-0, dominant win over Michigan. Finally, they get the monkey off their back there, win against Michigan for the first time in 6 years. So all they have to do is win the Big Ten championship against Indiana, and they will retain this number 1 spot here. Huge in terms of Heisman implications, Julian Sayin versus Fernando Mendoza. But really, in the grand scheme, this game does not matter. Yes, it's 1 versus 2. It's going to pop on TV. It should be a great game, and you never want to lose. But the loser of this game, Max, falls down to the 3 spot, maybe even stays at the number 2. So can't even say there's massive ramifications on that one. Both of those teams are in a good position. So same with Indiana here. They will go to the number 1 spot if they win versus Ohio State, and Max fall down to the number 3 spot if they lose. Then getting into Georgia, 11-1 here. They actually are in the SEC title now that Texas A&M lost. And I think they could go up to the number 2 spot if they beat Bama in the SEC title and potentially Indiana loses to Ohio State there, but not even a massive difference between number 2 and 3. Then Texas Tech at 11-1 here. So for the first 3 spots, I'm going to say that all of those teams are in the field regardless. But with Texas Tech, even though I have them at the 4 spot, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. If this Texas Tech team loses to BYU in the Big 12 championship, are they still in? I would say yes, but you never know with this committee here because there are going to be a lot of talented and seemingly deserving teams on the outside looking in there. But I do think that this Red Raiders team could improve to the number 2 line if they win. And then Georgia loses to Bama, and then potentially Indiana loses an ugly game to Ohio State, although that's more unlikely. So probably Texas Tech just needs to win that game against BYU as 13-point favorites, and then they will retain a first-round bye there. Then we get to the number 5 spot. I've got Oregon jumping up here at 11-1. Thought they looked very impressive on the road against Washington. So they're probably looking at a home playoff game. But I do think that they could get in the top 4, get that first-round bye if Texas Tech were to lose there to BYU. And then I have Texas A&M at the number 6 spot. They could also be at the number 5 or maybe the number 4 as well, or as low as 7. But I do respect that early season win on the road at Notre Dame there. But I do think that they could jump up to the number 5 spot if Texas Tech were to lose, but obviously very important where the committee ranks them after that tough loss on the road against Texas. Then number 7, Ole Miss. We have all of the drama with Lane Kiffin. As I'm recording this video, it has not been announced what he's going to do. It seems like he's going to take a $12 million a year, 7-year contract at LSU, but then try to coach the playoff. So we'll see there. They aren't in the SEC championship. I think they will get a home field playoff game in Vaught Hemingway Stadium, but maybe they don't have their coach. So we will have to monitor that, but they could head up to the number 6 seed if Texas Tech loses there. And then I think Oklahoma is around settled at the number 8 spot. Maybe they could get jumped if Bama were to beat Georgia, so then Bama would actually pass them as the SEC champions. And that would actually matter a lot because then they wouldn't host first round playoff game in Norman. But for now, I would just say that they will probably stick around the number 8 line after they get a very gutsy win at home against LSU. Then we get to the very entertaining stuff around the bubble, around the cut line here. These are my 9 through 16 seeds. So at the number 9 spot, we have Alabama staying put here, or actually going up a spot because I'll explain why Notre Dame falls in a bit. But Alabama gets the win in the Iron Bowl against Auburn. It was never going to be easy in that matchup, but they get it done by 7 points. And with the Texas A&M loss and their win, they actually get to the SEC championship in a rematch against Georgia. And that game is around a pick'em, should be a good one there in Atlanta. And I would say that they could actually jump all the way up to the number 4 spot just because of how much power the SEC has and how important this conference is and the reputation of Alabama. Even with the 2 losses, I do think that the SEC championship does warrant a first round bye here with the lobbying power that they have. So I do think that if Alabama were to beat Georgia twice, then they would get the number 4 spot there, potentially jumping past all of those teams. Now, where it gets interesting is if this Alabama team loses, now you're going to have people saying that a 10-3 Bama team deserves to miss the playoffs entirely because you have these other teams like Miami and Notre Dame sitting at the 10-2 mark, potentially also Vanderbilt, and maybe if BYU loses as well. But I think that Alabama should not be punished for making it to the extra game and potentially losing close. Now, if they lose by 20 or 30 points there, which is very unlikely to Georgia, maybe that's a different story. Or if Ty Simpson or a couple of the other great players end up going down. But ultimately, I just think that Alabama is clinched at this point. It's just, do they lose the SEC championship? Then they're probably on the road in the first round. Or do they win? Then they probably get the first round bye. Then we have the massive shakeup here. I have Miami jumping up from the 12 spot to the number 10 spot here, and I think that they should pass Notre Dame. They get a huge win in Pitt against a ranked Pittsburgh Panthers team, and they did it in more convincing fashion, actually, than Notre Dame did a few weeks ago to that same Pitt team at Acrisure Stadium. And I ultimately think that the Week 1 matchup is very meaningful in separating these two teams. They literally played on the same field, and it's not like Miami got really lucky in that game. Yes, they did win on a game-winning field goal, but they were winning for the majority of that game. And when looking at their 2 losses, yes, it's to 8-win SMU and 8-win Louisville, not the best teams in the world, but I mean, those are still decent opponents, and they barely lost those games, very close, and look dominant in some of their other games. They don't play in the best conference in the world, and it's a shame that they didn't make the ACC championship. But it's not like Notre Dame played a murderer's row, and we literally had these 2 teams on the same field in Week 1, and Miami came out on top. So I just do not understand why the committee will not compare these 2 teams in the same pod and honor the head-to-head as is supposed to be an important criterion. But we will see, so that is a large part of what we will react to this coming Tuesday when the playoff committee releases their rankings. And I think that regardless, Miami should root for an Alabama loss to Georgia, potentially a big one at that. That will really spark up this debate if Alabama gets crushed by Georgia. Very unlikely there. And then they will probably need a BYU loss. And probably the same thing goes for Notre Dame for both of those scenarios as well. And then Notre Dame, I have them going down to the 11th spot. They did just beat Stanford by 29, didn't really struggle in that game at all. So it doesn't really make sense for them to drop the 2 spots. The committee probably should have already had Miami above them, but we will see there. So I think that they should just be praying for the committee to keep their rankings and essentially bail them out, in my opinion, because it disrespects the head-to-head. But if the committee does stick to what they have been doing, then Notre Dame could potentially just stay put. Then we have Vanderbilt, and this is just such a shame because this is one of the best seasons, perhaps the best season in school history. You have Pavia going for the Heisman, and then you go into your rival's vaunted stadium in Neyland and you win by 21 there. What a statement against a ranked Tennessee team. And unfortunately for the Commodores, I don't think it's going to be enough here. There are just too many deserving teams in the field right now. So tough for Vanderbilt at the 10-2 record here, but I think that the best thing that they can root for is Pavia to get some Heisman votes there after an incredible campaign this year. But I do think that Vanderbilt will be left out of the playoff. Then we get to BYU at 11-1 here. They actually struggled in the first quarter. They were down 14-0 to Central Florida, but they did get the win. And ultimately, I just think that they have to beat this Texas Tech team in the Big 12 championship, and they will be left out if they lose. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They played this Texas Tech team in Lubbock earlier this season. They lost by 22, and that was not even an indicative score of how much of a beatdown that was. They probably deserved to lose by 40. Some of the other wins were pretty lucky as well, but you do have to honor the fact that they won all of those games. But ultimately here, the strength of schedule was just not up to snuff with some of these other teams, even though they all had 2 losses here. And they have a chance to prove it on the field in AT&T Stadium. But I do think that no matter if they lose or how they lose, this team will be left out just because there's so many other great teams out there. So I think that if BYU wins, beats Texas Tech, they will jump them in the rankings there. They will get a home playoff game in Provo and potentially get the number 7 spot. But if they lose, they are done. Same thing can be said for Utah. They don't play this week. They are 10-2 here. They are definitely out, in my opinion. Texas, I know they got a huge win against Texas A&M, their rival, but they have the 3 losses here. They are not even close. I know that Sark wanted to do his best to lobby in the post-game interview with Molly McGrath, but ultimately this team isn't even close. I mean, you have to honor both Miami and Notre Dame before them, potentially also BYU if they lose close to Texas Tech. Maybe you could argue they're ahead of Utah and maybe ahead of Vanderbilt because they beat them head-to-head, but Vandy only has 2 losses there, so it's not that they went to Ohio State and lost close or even that they got drugged by Georgia, but really you just can't lose to a 4-win Florida team in the swamp there like they did, and some of the wins were pretty lucky there as well, like against Kentucky and Mississippi State. Then here we get to Virginia. They might actually be at the 17th spot because you've got the SC Trojans here who got a win against UCLA. But either way, they are going for the auto bid in the ACC title against Duke. They're only a 2.5-point favorite against the Duke Blue Devils there in Charlotte. But if they do win that game, then they should be the 11 seed there. Then we get to the G5 bid. And it actually gets really interesting here with the auto bids because due to the SMU loss, we do have that 7-5 Duke team going against Virginia. So let's say Virginia loses to Duke. Then you've got an 8-5 Duke team who really did nothing, did not look very impressive in any of their games. And so I ultimately think that Duke might be left out here. So in the G5 ranks, you're definitely looking at the first best ranked G5 champion being the winner of that American championship game. That's North Texas at Tulane. That should be a great matchup this coming Friday night. And then the 6th highest ranked conference champion might be that JMU team going against Troy. They should be a pretty heavy favorite there on Friday night at home. But let's say they lose that game, then things could get really weird because we do not even know, as I'm recording this video, who is going to be in the Mountain West Championship. There is currently a 4-way tie right now between a few teams out there. So if Troy is to upset JMU and Duke is to beat UVA, then perhaps one of those Mountain West teams would get in, or maybe they would just give an 8-5 Duke team the nod. That is going to be very interesting discourse heading into this week there, but I definitely think that all eyes on that Friday night will definitely be on that North Texas Tulane game in the foremost spot because the winner of that is definitely in the playoffs at this point. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think of my thoughts and analysis in the comments down below. What do you guys think near the cut line? Do you think that the head-to-head should matter between Miami and Notre Dame? Or do you think that Notre Dame should stay ahead of the Canes there? What do you think of BYU potentially losing to Texas Tech? Do you think that Vanderbilt and Texas have an outside shot? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys all in the next one.